After years of bad business decisions and financial loss, Walt Disney had become a laundering ring for...
First of all, what went through my mind is how stupid am I to actually volunteer for this?
Hey, curious cats. Thanks for joining me today on my, well, I was going to say first podcast, but officially this is like my second because my first podcast got removed. It was that controversial. So you guys are in for it today. Anyway, while I have you guys here and your attention, I wanted to put a disclaimer out there. And the disclaimer is that if anybody is triggered by the subject of abuse, anything like that, now might be the time to just go ahead and out of here because this may not be the podcast for you. But like I say, if a story doesn't shock and surprise you, it's not worth telling. This research that I've collected, I'm going to do kind of via story time and read you some of the things that I have found, but it is on the happiest place on earth. Yes, I am talking about our beloved Walt Disney World. But today we're going to be covering not the happiest part, but the darkest side of Walt Disney and Disney World.
Show you the world, shining, shimmering, splendid. Tell me
So take a seat, buckle up, and go ahead and hold on to those rose-colored glasses for just a little bit longer because I am about to take you on one of the bumpiest rides in Magic Kingdom. Yes, we are going to hop on that truth trail on to find that white rabbit.
Oh, Dinah, it's just a rabbit with a waistcoat and a watch.
Oh, my dear whiskies! I'm late!
Now, this is
So just a little background. As a young family, I had always kind of looked at Walt Disney World as this, and I know this sounds silly, but as like this rite of passage. Like, you know, I have to take, because I went when I was younger, I have to take my kids to Disney World. They have to experience that too because I just loved it growing up as a kid. And so I suppose that that's kind of why I exposed them to countless hours of the best Disney movies, songs, and shows. But with that said, I kind of felt like, well, they're in good hands for a couple of hours while I get, laundry done or dishes or kitchen cleaned, whatever. That was my excuse. But the more I think about it and the more research I've done, I think, were they actually safe watching those cartoons? Now, when the day came to surprise my kids with a Christmas vacation to Disney, to say they were excited was a complete understatement. What I had no clue about was that actually parents, I guess they call up to Disney like a year, maybe even 2 years in advance so that Disney can help plan their, Disney adventure with their children. And I didn't know that. I guess you actually have to make reservations and you have to, you have to meet all the Disney characters. And, there's just so much to do there. And I didn't know that it took so much planning. But, when we called them like 3 months out from ours, they were actually really accommodating. And we were shocked at the hurdles that they went through just to try to make us happy. And I will have to say, once we got there and we experienced the whole Disney, experience, it was so magical. So I just wanted to put that out there to say that I have always loved Disney. However, I will say that after we had our really great experience at Disney, it started to make me kind of wonder and look into like the Disney procedures because at the time, I was a business owner and an entrepreneur. So I understood how culture was kind of a complicated thing to execute on a daily basis. And so I was just interested in knowing how do they do that how have they done that for so long and they continue to do that? That just really interested me. Now, those of you that have been before, I would actually be interested to know like what you guys thought, if your experience was just as great as ours. But I would say it's really difficult not to fall in love with the magic when you go to Magic Kingdom. Gives you asking the question, what kind of magic are we actually falling in love with? So over the years, I had heard just some strange rumors, just different things about Walt Disney. And one of the things that triggered my interest was that I heard that Walt Disney sold his soul for fame and fortune. You know, we've heard all of that about different celebrities from time to time. Now, this was before that theory was real popular. So it always kind of stuck in my mind. And I'm like thinking, sold his soul? What really does that mean?
Walt Disney was an FBI informant. Not many people know that Walt Disney had a special relationship with the FBI director J. Edgar Hoover. Due to this friendship, Disney was one of the rare studios which was allowed to film inside the FBI headquarters in Washington.
If I told you I found information that supported the theory that Walt Disney partnered with the CIA when building Disney World? Would that shock you? Or that many of Walt Disney's cartoons and designs are filled with subliminal messages that have ties to creating the perfect MK Ultra victim? Or what if I told you that the tunnels under the theme parks are used for more nefarious purposes? Now, in order to make sense of all these allegations, we need to make sense of what we know and do a little searching. I mean, it could definitely be that it's totally not true and they're rumors, but that's why we investigate, right? To see what we find. All right, guys. So first things first, who was Walt Disney? Walter Elias Disney was this American animator and film producer. He was also an entrepreneur. He was a pioneer of the American animation industry, and he introduced several developments in the production of cartoons. As a film producer, he holds the record for the most Academy Awards earned and nominations by an individual. He is the most noted creator of the character Mickey Mouse and founder of the Disney Corporation and theme parks. So just for time's sake, I'm only going to delve into like Walt's childhood, the information that pertains to this episode. Just for the record, you can go to my website and you can check out any receipts for the information that I have. And you can also do more research on there because I don't have even half of everything I found listed. So it's there for you guys to dig whenever you want. Now, there is an article that I'm going to read, and it's by Fritz Springmeier. Now, the theory is that Walt Disney was a Freemason as well as an occultist. Now, what Fritz had to say was that early in Walt's career, he was a self-motivated individual with lots of energy who was constantly seeking an outlet. He was more a giver than he was a taker in relationships. So it says in the first few years when he was responsible for making business contracts, he often gave away his work without setting price for profits. He even wrote letters to his boss to the effect that his first priority were making good cartoons and not profits. And he was okay if he'd work without profits, but he did want some appreciation for his work. Now, I believe this was, his sensitive nature showing through. As a kid, Walt was very drawn to the occult. Now, personally, I think that, and this is just from research I've done, that a lot of times people are drawn to the dark arts and the occult because of the magic aspect of it. And I feel like it kind of gave him maybe a sense of control. And it's usually people that come from abusive homes, which, Walt did come from an abusive upbringing. Now, as Walt's career progressed, it was said that the occult world backed up Walt, and they both believed that if they could bring out the child part of a person, called the child by various psychologists, then they could appeal to the curiosity and feelings of the child parts of adults. Now, if it worked with adults, they could do the same with the child part in children, thus creating an easily controlled individual. An important side note is that Fritz says that Walt Disney understood and agreed with the Illuminati Great Plan that called for the family life to be destroyed. Now, if you guys don't know what that is, that's basically like there was this plan that, they wanted to destroy the family. They didn't want children to have fathers. They wanted the whole order of the family life to be disturbed. And then they wanted children to rebel against their parents. They believed they could bring in witchcraft if they appealed to the curiosity of the child and every adult. We also cannot ignore the focus on witches, magic, and spells in his movies.
You evil, nasty people.
I'm mad about games, you know. Well, come on, get going.
Eris, the goddess of discord.
And just a hint of lust.
Now, even the music that Walt used for some of his cartoons were inspired by the dark arts. So Walt used this specific music, and it was called Le Secret du Printemps, and it's called the Rite of Spring. It was a pagan ritual where a virgin sacrifices herself by dancing to death. Music that he used for Fantasia. Now, I couldn't find a whole lot of details on the Freemason connection. However, I feel like it doesn't take a lot to notice the deep connections to both the occult world as well as the Freemasons. But again, like in Hollywood, I guess they kind of intertwine. Now, but I did find contradicting information on his status with the Freemasons. Now, some have said that his Freemason membership was debunked. However, one of my searches took me to an official Freemason website where he was actually listed as a member of the Master Unity Lodge number 191, where he was initiated in 1923. Interesting. Now, for those that don't know, the Freemasons are a secret group of men that are said to take part in dark and nefarious practices. They commonly use personal symbols and hand gestures to communicate ideas, agendas, and to make themselves seen by other members primarily. Now, I actually know a few Masons, and they'll swear to me that they're not involved in anything dark. And granted, I don't think that every Mason is, but I know from my research that the entire organization as a whole definitely dabbles in the dark arts. And I was also told that, you don't really, if you're in the Freemasons, unless you're a 33rd degree Mason, you don't really get to experience the type of dark stuff that they do. Now, I believe that if you're privy to it or you have a good, discernment, you can probably see it from some of those lower level Masons. But, for the most part, I don't think people really see what they're all about. Now, I've said that there are some that have claimed to have debunked this connection. However, it's important to note that if Walt actually wasn't a Freemason, why are there so many Masonic symbols all over the park, hidden in plain sight? That's a good question, right? Because if he wasn't a Mason or he didn't agree with their ideology or their practices, then why do it? Why put it there? I don't know. That's just my thinking. The second theory is that Walt Disney hired the CIA to help him acquire Walt Disney World. In the 1960s, Walt Disney and his business partner, his brother Roy Disney, were already planning the creation of Walt Disney World. Now, they wanted to purchase land in Florida, and they were determined to get it below market value. According to the Daily Beast, they were determined to get the land at below market value, and that Disney operatives engaged in a far-ranging conspiracy to make sure sellers had no idea who was buying their Central Florida property. By resorting to such tactics, Disney acquired more than 40 square miles of land for less than $200 an acre. Now, in order to remain in control of the Disney empire, once it had been acquired, the Disney brothers turned to none other than the father of the CIA, William Donovan, for help. The article talks about how Donovan's attorney provided fake identities for Disney agents. They also set up a secret communication center and orchestrated a disinformation campaign. And this was in order to maintain control over the overall development. And in order to do that, Disney and their advisors realized that the company would have to find a way to limit the voting power of the private residents, even though they acknowledged that their efforts violated the Equal Protection Clause. Now, here again, the CIA was here to help. Now, you can continue reading in detail, but you get the dark picture, right? So the CIA used their tactics on the people of Florida to get their way. They broke laws, they made up lies, spread misinformation, and caused confusion with conspiracies using their intelligence power to manipulate, control, and ultimately get what they want. Again, that's another dark connection. So I also found some information on the subterranean tunnels below Walt Disney World. Now, as far as I know, Disneyland also has the tunnels, although I didn't find any information on when they were built and all of that. You can assume that the things that are going on in these tunnels in Disney World were probably going on in the tunnels at Disneyland. So let's see here. According to the CIA informants opposed to the New World Order, CIA contractors were brought in to build the underground tunnels under Disney World in 1977. Now, these contractors were sworn to secrecy, but were only informed on a need-to-know basis why the CIA was involved with an amusement park. To work on the tunnel project took an above top secret clearance. A major programming center was constructed under Lake Holden. The tunnel system was built for programming trauma-based, total mind-controlled slaves. It was built of concrete and steel reinforcement. Now, Lake Holden lies just to the northwest side of the Orlando International Airport and just south of the interstate. And, they go into detail about where these tunnels actually exist. But I'm going to skip through that, and I'm going to go to, In spite of the draconian measures of secrecy, numerous lawsuits, which were federal and state, were filed over the years by victims trying to expose the Disney World programming centers. And then it says they were finally dismantled and cleaned up, and the maintenance tunnel level and a casting tunnel level were open to the public. So apparently there were too many people coming out. And so in order to save their butts, right? They had to close it down. During this heyday, the programmers, which were the military and intelligence men, had exotic offices underground with unusual programming equipment. It doesn't take an imagination to realize that if Disney carried mind control programming above and below ground, that they would need tight security forces to protect their secrets. Indeed, such is the case. Disney amusement parks have been granted draconian powers wherever they have been built. So this actually reminds me of a report I saw in 2021. And actually, I think I only saw this. I saw one news report on it and I never saw anything again. And then I just kind of would see things on social media. So maybe you guys remember this, but it was a report of hundreds of children being rescued from an underground tunnel in Washington, D.C., and they were rescued by military ops. Anyway, I went and I tried to find this article. And when I went to find the article, I found several articles that were debunking this whole situation. But what I noticed is there was actually no proof in the fact that they were debunking. They had no reason as to why it was debunked. They just said it had been debunked. We're just supposed to believe that. So I, honestly, I don't have any belief either way, whether this existed or it didn't. I don't have enough information to have an opinion, I suppose. However, the truth is that, we don't see proof that it actually happened. We don't see the proof of it being debunked. So really nothing has been proven. And so I just challenge you guys to not let people fool you just because they say it's been debunked. Well, I think we should always ask, why? Or, or even, how do we know that's true? Show me proof. I think we all need to be like that and do our due diligence when we start forming opinions and believing things. Now, I will say that what I know from experience is that where there's smoke, there's usually always fire. Now, this DC is not the only account that has made public news. So that is interesting. And another thing I will say is that, most of the time, somebody who's going to lie about that, they would have to do a lot of research. I don't think that this information is privy to the public. So I don't know. I just don't know liars like that to be real detailed and to dot their I's and cross their T's. Usually you see, really detailed lies done by, more professional liars. I don't know, the CIA. I don't know, just my thought. All right, guys. The next theory is that, what was it? Oh, Walt liked children just a little too much, if you know what I mean. Walt's work life to many employees was questioned when his hypocritical lifestyle was exposed. Are we shocked? So he had high demands for his employees, like the way they dressed, the things that they were allowed to do, and how they were able to, or how they should act. And he had this image that needed to be protected. However, Walt, on the other hand, was not that way. So it says that he was an alcoholic who smoked several packs of cigarettes a day, had facial hair, and lost his temper nearly every single day.
His image was, I think he wanted to be thought of as a hail fellow, well-met, good-natured, but he wasn't. Nobody does stuff on the scale that he did. Is a good-natured sweetheart of a guy. He was a hard-driving guy, and I don't think he ever resolved those conflicts.
The people around him said that he had a bad reputation for being hard to be around. Now, this was really strange to me. Okay, so some employees had even said that he had a very strange work schedule. He wouldn't come into work early. In fact, he would come in like in the afternoons. And it says that he would emerge from the subterranean tunnels defensively telling people that he'd been up early helping the costume and shipping crews all morning. And this was a common occurrence. So just in my experience and being an entrepreneur, business owner, I don't know the boss to really get down and dirty with the labor crew. I'm just saying, I mean, there are so many other things to do. Like, I mean, you could totally have somebody else help them. Like, why is he doing it in a suit? Like, I don't know. Just makes you think he was down there doing other things. Just my thought. Also, Walt was not known to be a huge fan of children as he got older. He, in fact, didn't have much of a relationship with his own two kids. So his oldest daughter said, quote, "He didn't spoil us. Like a lot of adolescent girls, I was crazy about horses and I got quite good at riding. I yearned for my own horse, but Daddy wouldn't buy one. And we didn't have a lot of clothes or other things." So there were a lot of other strange stories that I read about his youngest adopted daughter named Sharon. Now, first off, Sharon's adoption was hidden from everybody around them. In fact, there was actually an incident that I read where Walt had to take time off from work, and his excuse was that, you know, his wife was in labor with Sharon, which is weird. I don't know. But either way, it was said that he didn't really like her very much. And there were even times when he acted as if she didn't exist and kind of forgot her name at times, too. So she was eventually sent off to Switzerland, where she attended boarding school. Okay, now I'm going to read you something. This is from Fritz Springmeier's writings again, and it says that Walt took Sharon to Alaska. And it says she had soft blonde locks and was attractive. Okay, guys, this is kind of written funny. So to be honest with you, I would love to know exactly, because this information sounds firsthand. So I'd like to know exactly where he got this information from. So when I read it, it's funny to me. I mean, it's not funny. Sorry, that was probably, it's just weird. Okay. She had soft blonde locks and was attractive. In June 1948, Walt took Sharon, who was then an attractive 12-year-old, to Alaska with him for about 2 months. That's a long time to be alone with your kid. For most of the trip, Walt and Sharon were alone together. For a father who had ignored Sharon for years, now Walt was totally obsessed with Sharon. He bathed Sharon every night, combed her hair, washed her underwear, and carefully dressed her each night from head to toe before taking her to nice restaurants. He even followed her when she sleepwalked. Why was Sharon a dissociative person? So it was a little dramatically written, but I get it. I mean, obviously, they're in Alaska for 2 months. Who's going to be doing her laundry? He is. Who's going to be brushing her hair? Most likely she is. She's 12. Who's going to be bathing her? Most likely she is. I don't know. I mean, this just seemed a little dramatic, but you know, who knows where he got this information? It could have totally have been from a first-hand account. And now, if it is true, I think his questions are valid. If all this were true, you do have to ask yourself, like, why all of a sudden does he want to be around her for 2 straight months with no one else to help him? I don't know. Okay, there was an incident with a well-known attractive young actor named Bobby Driscoll. It was documented by people that surrounded Walt that they had suspected him of having a crush on the young actor. Now, Walt had cast him to star in many hit productions. Now, one of his most noted was his title role as the voice of Peter Pan in 1953. So he was Walt's golden boy until he wasn't. Walt abruptly fired Bobby, leaving him jobless and lost. When I looked into that, it didn't really talk about why Walt fired him. It did mention Walt, this is terrible, but Walt didn't like his acne and that it had become harder to hide it. This led him down a spiral of financial problems and drug addiction. And that also led to homelessness, where Bobby's body was found years later by 2 children on a bench outside of East Village in New York. Many have wondered, could years of being Walt's golden child to abruptly being fired be the sole culprit of his sad demise? Or could there be deeper issues, more sinister things at play like abuse? Now, I can't say that I have firsthand knowledge of what this kind of abuse does to one's psyche. You know, I have unfortunately had conversations with acquaintances who have had this happen to them. And I will say one thing that I have found in common by listening to them, as well as different accounts that I've heard from people like on the internet, it is interesting how the common denominator is that they end up with a addiction issue later in life. I don't know. I'm not a psychologist, but to me, that seems like there has to be some kind of connection. Okay, you guys, I'm trying to move forward. Okay. The next theory is that the Disney brothers had financial issues up until they sold out to the mafia gangsters of Hollywood. Okay, so as unfortunate as this part of the research is, this kind of ties things like together. So Walt had some deep connections to Illuminati members and occultists and to the intelligence. So I would say that it's far too many accounts to really name right now during this podcast. But again, go to my website and look at the information. You can read it for yourself. But I do believe that because he had some deep connections, that the influence that they had over his work is definitely something that should be questioned. So Walt's brother, Roy, was said to have managed the financials. He was known to have kept 2 books. One were the financials that were primarily Walt Disney's income. 2 were the others. Okay. So it says, when the books were exposed, it became apparent that Walt's cartoons were not primarily paying the bills. After years of bad business decisions and financial loss, Walt Disney had become a laundering ring for films and CP. I'm doing that, you guys, because I don't want this video taken down again. So if you guys kind of know what I'm saying. However, the majority of the funds that they were receiving were residuals that came from Walt Disney selling his work to the intelligence agencies for MKUltra and total mind control programming. So, you know, if we take that saying, follow the money, and we apply it to this situation, it starts to make you wonder, like, where is Walt's inspiration coming from? If we know that he's making the majority of his money off of these types of films, then why wouldn't you do what they're asking you to do and put in your films? Okay, the next theory is that the Walt Disney Company was involved with the CIA as a brainwashing tool for generations of children. So one thing to remember as we go forward is that the CIA has ties to the MKUltra program, and this is documented in official government documents. If you're interested in reading the whole boring thing, you definitely can, but it does go into like the experiments, the things that they did. MKUltra was a name given to a particular CIA experiment where the active brainwashing and mind control tactics were used on unwilling and unknowing participants through drugs like LSD, barbiturates, and more. You guys, I want to do another podcast over this because it is so deep and there are so many connections, even to like the music industry. Anyway, it's really deep. Now, if you research the subject of MKUltra, you'll realize it's pretty vast. There are numerous tactics that can be used to program the minds of individuals. There is a particular one that we'll cover called the trauma-based mind control. This is said to be obvious in movies like Alice in Wonderland, where throughout the movie, the confusion of what is up and what is down is said to have effects on a young mind, disassociating human mind with its trauma.
By the way, if you'd really like to know, he went that way.
Who did?
The white rabbit.
He did?
He did what?
Went that way.
Who did?
The white rabbit.
What rabbit?
But didn't you just say? Oh dear.
Can you stand on your head?
The term follow the rabbit is used to trigger the disassociation from the victim's mind and body. Just as Alice follows the white rabbit into the looking glass into a world of wonder, this encourages the victim to follow their handler through the program to completely disassociate from their minds, creating the perfect mind control victim. Okay, I also found that the name Alice is said to be given to any child MKUltra soldier, hence Alice in Wonderland and Alice Through the Looking Glass or The Other Side of the Mirror. Now, weirdly, Walt also has other cartoons with Alice involved, like we have Alice Hunting in Africa, Alice's Spooky Adventure, Alice Plays Cupid, Alice Cans the Cannibals, Alice Rattled by Rats, Alice Chops the Suey, Alice Charms the Fish, Alice the Whaler, Alice the Nut Beach. I totally said that backwards. Alice the Beach Nut. Now, another interesting tidbit. Did you know that the original story was called Alice's Adventures, written by Lewis Carroll? Only Lewis Carroll actually didn't write it. A man named Charles Dodson did. Yeah, because Charles Dodson was Lewis Carroll, or Lewis Carroll was Charles Dodson. I have to get away from all this Alice in Wonderland upside down trauma. I'm so confused. Anyway, this dark connection has a dark side, so he was known to be a rather strange man. He preferred the company of children instead of adults. The story is that he became obsessed with a young girl named Alice, whose parents were a friend of his family. He began to write her stories and letters and take photos of her and her sisters, sometimes naked. Yes, there are some nude photos of them. Underage. Weird. So those around him suspected the obvious, which is what led to their communication being cut off and him leaving her one last love letter in the form of Lewis Carroll's Alice's Adventures. So knowing this, you have to ask yourself, why on earth would Walt make a children's cartoon out of a pedo love letter? Just saying. So growing up, I always felt like there was something off with the Disney cartoons. Now, I loved them, yes, but some of them gave me like a weird vibe. Now, obviously, you guys, I love weird, right? Because look at me, I'm doing this Bizarro show. But like Alice in Wonderland was one of them that always made me feel a little strange. Peter Pan was one of them. I definitely could not watch Fantasia. I remember as a kid trying to watch it. My mom let me watch it, and I just did not. It gave me like a weird feeling. Didn't like it. Never have. I don't even think my kids have watched it because it's not a movie I like. Anyway, I never could put my finger on it, but there was always something that I was triggered, you guys. So I can remember as a kid, one of my friends telling me, Aladdin says something really dirty in the Disney movie. So, of course, being the curious cat that I have always been, I took my VHS tape and I stuck it in the player and I fast forwarded it, did a little rewind action, and there I had it. I saw it right then and there. So the scene starts out in the movie where Aladdin visits Princess Jasmine, right? I think we know the scene where he's on the balcony. He flies up with his magic carpet, and there Raja greets him, which is her tiger, and they're on the balcony, and Raja playfully tackles him, and the two begin to wrestle. All right. So as they're wrestling, you can clearly hear Aladdin grunt and breathe heavy. However, what he says under his breath broke my 12-year-old heart at the time. And he says,
"So how's our little bow doing?" Come on, good. Can you just take off? Down, can you?
Wait.
Come on, good. Can you just take off?
How had I not heard that before? Was my first thought. And then I thought, well, if he's trying to talk dirty to Jasmine, why is he talking to the tiger? Why doesn't he wait till Jasmine comes out on the balcony? And it wasn't until I got older that I realized he wasn't saying that for Jasmine. He was saying that for the viewers. Dun, dun, dun. Did you make a connection? I totally did. There is also a form of mind control, and it's called subliminal messaging, and I know you guys have heard of it. And believe it or not, it is actually a thing. So these are actually hidden messages that can be used in music and commercials and movies. And in a nutshell, it's a type of mind control where you flash brief images or texts, and they're flashed on a screen for like a millisecond, and it makes it hard for the viewer to consciously register them. And it says proponents of subliminal messaging suggest that these hidden messages can influence the subconscious mind, bypassing rational thinking and critical analysis. Now, the belief is that the subconscious mind can absorb and respond to these messages, affecting decision-making and behavior without the individual being aware of it. So this type of messaging has been identified in several Disney projects, and I bet you guys have already noticed them or heard about them, but one of them is the underwater castle made from male genitalia in The Little Mermaid. There's another one, and it is as in The Lion King, and they have a bunch of like sexual subliminal messages that float up on the screen. Again, you can't see it unless someone tells you about it and you like slow motion it. There's nudity in The Rescuers Down Under and Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Yeah, I mean, there's so many, you guys. I will list pictures on my website so you'll be able to see some of them. But, you know, those of you don't think for 1 second that Walt was innocent and think, you know, oh, well, he was dead before those cartoons were made. Well, you know what? He's not that innocent, because you can find this in the early cartoons of Mickey Mouse, where he loves giving his audience a little flasheroo on the factory line. Yeah. Now, my opinion, I don't personally believe that Walt Disney was this genius animator that figured out how to master the dark arts with cartoons. Like, I don't believe that. I actually see the webs from a more intelligent, more organized group weaving the demonic in and out of seemingly innocent children's entertainment. And so I think that point can be made because, you know, we have seen strange subliminal messaging witnessed in Disney movies and cartoons and shows. And, you know, recently there have been a few, I would say one that people really know, I mean, I think most know about, but there's been one pedo ring that's been exposed, and they were associated with Disney. As well as there have been Disney creators that have admittedly were implanting subliminal messaging in the movies. And the point to all of this is that these are things that have actually come out. People have admitted to it. And the fact is that none of this belongs in children's entertainment, period. So we can all agree that that stuff is happening. I personally believe that Walt Disney was used or hired by the intelligence to produce a sinister product for children. I believe that he used his cartoons as well as music to program young minds and influence their subconscious by the use of MK Ultra programming. You know, I think we have to ask ourselves, why do we see a rabbit trail heavily connecting the CIA to Disney, if that weren't true? These programming practices have ancient ties to the occult teachings and ritual abuse. So according to research, not only did Walt get financially rewarded from participating, but so do many who are involved in these nefarious practices. Now, this is an indication that these particular practices have been going on from the beginning of time and will continue until it's fully brought to the surface. I know there are some of you out there that are going to say, you know, well, this is no big deal. I've watched Disney my entire life and I turned out fine. Well, I'm sure you did. I'm no expert by any means on how long-term effects of such practices will manifest on an individual. But again, my job here is really just to research, connect the dots, and then expose what I believe to be the truth. In a nutshell, it doesn't take long to realize that the majority of Disney's work is tied to some sort of dark history, unfortunately. That is evident from the storylines and the music he uses to the smallest of details. Like, did you ever wonder why all of Disney's characters, main characters, are motherless? So yes, my friend, even this is meant to affect the subconscious. You guys, I could talk about this all day, but you'll just have to wait for another episode. You guys, thanks for joining me today as we covered the now crappiest place on earth. Catch me in my next episode where we will again discover the strange and the bizarro. And who knows, maybe next time I'll catch you on the dark side of the moon.